Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, and our speakers. My name is Minh Q. I'm a committee member of the 2012-2013 LSESU Vietnam Society, and I would like to present to you, our committee, the road forward to Vietnam's development in the near future. First of all, I would like to really thank you all for coming down here, because this is our very first annual lecture of this kind. It is in fact one of the very first events in a very long time at the LSE or in many institutions around here that focus especially on Vietnam and the questions of development. And it comes at a time that can be said to be a crossroad in Vietnam's development. I would like also to thank Loose TV, who have very graciously agreed to film this entire event for us, free of charge. I would like to thank the LSE, who have provided this environment for us to gather and have an exchange of ideas. And I would like to thank both our speakers who have taken time out of their lives to come down here completely free of charge to speak with you. This is an LSE public event, and that is really the definition of LSE public events. We have such a huge program of truly the best minds in the world coming together and speaking about issues that matter. And they always do it in the spirit of trying to learn something, trying to discuss something. And that's why it's always free. As a final note, I would just like to say that as a public event, this will be available on YouTube, on Loose LSE, as well as on the Vietnam LSE website, which is vietnamlse.co.uk. And that the opinions expressed here by our speakers may not reflect those that are held by the organizers of this event. Thank you. Professor Athar Hussain, the director of the Asia Research Center, who is going to be our chair for today.
So, good evening, and so my role is to learn and listen and to moderate or whatever it means. But I have a great pleasure to welcome four eminent speakers. First on the right is Ambassador, His Excellency the Ambassador from Vietnam to the United Kingdom. Dr. Catherine Locke, Senior Lecturer in Development Studies at the University of East Anglia. Dr. Catherine Locke, Mr. Paul Smith, who is Deputy Chairman of Nash Outsourcing.
Yes, that'll do.
Mr. Lally, who is Deputy Chairman of UK Trade and Investment Commission. So, as a moderator, what I'm looking for is a brief statement from each of the speakers. Well, nominally for 7 minutes. If you've got something important to say, by all means you can take a few more minutes, but if it's too much, then I'll stop you. So I don't want to stop in the way of you listening to the speaker, so let me start with His Excellency, the Ambassador from Vietnam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hussain. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues, it's really an honor for me to be here today. 5 years ago, I had the honor also to be the moderator for Dr. Hussain back in Hanoi when he came to give a talk on
issues related to Vietnam development and international development. And I could not imagine someday, 5 years down the road, I could be here again, but Dr. Hussain would return with favor and helping me and our speakers today. So we can see that I must be very brave to come here to talk about the future, because I'm not good at predicting the future at all. It's also very difficult for me as ambassador to talk to you about issues like economic development and other, academic nature. The best appropriate talk for me is to come here shaking hands with Dr. Lally, Dr. Hussain, our colleague Dr. Locke, Mr. Goldsmith, and say hello, congratulate you with the great event, and wish you fine success. But now I take the responsibility to share you some of the observations of mine, only informally, how I can see the future of Vietnam, especially in terms of economic development. And let me try to manage with the here. Yes. I hope that no sensitive movies appear instead of my presentation. No, right here. Yep. Thank you. Caution, sleep. Okay, so again, when the Vietnam civil society approached me, asking me to come and talk about the future of Vietnam in 2 or 3 years, I thought to myself, why so humble? Why we just talk about the near future? Why don't we talk about, the world in 100 years, Vietnam in 50 years, or at least talking about 1 decade ahead? But then I realized that talking about the near future is no way easier, even much harder. 100 down the road, nobody here is around, I believe. Me either. So nobody can judge what I'm saying today, right or wrong. But imagine 2 days from now, very important event would happen in London, and you can say exactly the result. You would be much, much better off. Who can guess what? Next 2 days, Friday, the euro millions. And the reward is much more than today. We check for Asia Research Center. But today we have to be satisfied ourselves with the tea break networking session, a hot cup of tea afterwards. So with this reward, let me talk about the future of Vietnam economy. And the outline is very simple. In Vietnam, we have a saying that one must know the past to understand the present and to foresee the future. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Vietnam economy in this year, challenges in the first sign of recovery, and then we move on to share with some observations. Vietnam economy down the road. I tried to be very brief, but if I am a little bit longer than expected, Professor Hussain will help me to cut off. So where we are now, you will know. As a diplomat, we always tell you what you already know. We can have more vague language, but I try to be more concise here. So after 25 years of the revolution, Vietnam became one of the most, the fastest growing economies in the world, with the average GDP growth 7–8%. And we also highly open economy, we are now very, very dependent on international trade. 160% GDP equals to foreign trade. And last but not least, you can see we are ready for the connected world. As Mr. William Hague, the Foreign Secretary of the UK, once said, 35% of the population is connected to the internet. In terms of human development, Vietnam also is very proud to be one of the very few countries which achieved remarkable progress in poverty reduction. We just halved the poverty rates in Vietnam just over a very short time. And we reached the middle income status about 3 years ago. Regarding human development index, we are also in the middle range. And especially important is we have a very well-educated, hardworking workforce with 50% of the population under 25. Of course, challenges ahead, and you can see the last 2 years we are facing perhaps the most serious challenges so far for the last 2 decades, I guess. Macroeconomic instabilities, external debt, the bad debt of the banking system, the need to restructure the economy, and the shortage of both infrastructure and high-skilled laborers. So we are facing a lot of challenges, and it seems that the easy part of the reform is over, and now we are heading to solve the most difficult parts. The target set by the National Assembly exactly last year for this year is on the screen you can see is quite modest regarding the GDP growth. For example, before we had 7 or 8%. Now we just try to receive 6 or 6.5. And especially for job creation, we try to create 1.6 million more new jobs this year. But you can see that we face so many challenges this year. So only 5 out of the 15 targets set by our National Assembly cannot be met. The point is, those 5 indicators are the most important: GDP growth, job creation, and so on. Nevertheless, just a few weeks ago, the National Assembly just issued a report saying that the socio-economic performance had recorded some positive movements. The declining lending interest rate, price exchange rate, and higher foreign currency reserve. And that's a result of the policy package adopted by our government in February 2011. And right now, the down appreciated a little bit, 1%. Inflation is down to a very high 23%. And the foreign exchange, especially now, we have more than 20 billion US dollars. And especially if you look at the world trade, it's going down, due to the continuing crisis. But we recorded trade surplus, 34 billion US dollars, very modest. But it's the first time after 20 years we would have such a surplus. Again, as I said, serious challenges remain ahead. We also facing the problem with the real estate market, which is very closely connected to the financial and banking market in Vietnam. We need also to serve the state-owned enterprise reforms, and we are also facing serious social development issues. Nevertheless, if we are talking about the near future, in 1 or 2 years, you can see a much better sky now for next year and beyond. And I think the timing of this seminar is very right, because just 2 weeks ago, a number of international institutions released their report and update about Vietnam economy and the future of Vietnam, long-term, short-term, and near-term. So I try to give you an overall picture, try to put together. That's my own product. I looked at 1987. I try to put in 1 table, 2 tables for you to follow. So that's the 5 institutions focus: ADB, World Bank, IMF, the Economic International Unit, HSBC as a bank. All of them reduced the focus for this year, but again, the focus for the next year is much better. You can see most of the focus for GDP growth around 5.7, 5.9, or 6%. That's a very good given all the ongoing economic crisis in the world, in the region. And I try also to put a new table to put Vietnam in perspective in comparison with other economies in the world. In Vietnam, GDP growth next year is only second to Indonesia. It's also another bright news for us. China was 8.5, 8.1, cooling down a little bit, but still very, very, very hot growth. Just an additional graph to show you the annual inflation is stabilized going down. The forecast for 12 and 13. All the figures here, either for ADB or for the economists, I asked for permission for the economists to use the latest release for today. as I mentioned, inflation continues to be a problem for Vietnam. And right now, you can see that the forecast for next year is much better, but still is among the highest inflation rate in the region. Vietnam is almost even 3 times in comparison with Thailand for the inflation rate. International reserve, 2.5 worth of import, month of import in Vietnam. Now we can cover with our 20+ billion US$ reserve. I mentioned before the openness of Vietnam. If you look at the graph, I try to give you the trend. The trend is very clear-cut, no fluctuation much. So right now with 160% GDP, that's the total valuable trade. But the focus for next year is even brighter. We are achieving 200% of GDP. So the dependence of Vietnam economy on external markets is getting higher. So we have both plus and minus. We don't have the time to discuss later, but that's basically a very good thing, good trend. The central government debt is very moderate. That's something we can be quite sure. In the graph, you can see that we are just down the road, even better than a lot of our countries, Thailand, Malaysia, Pakistan, even India, Singapore. It's not a big problem for Vietnam. 2 bright sides also. I think Paul Smith would also talk about that. I want to give you the graph here. It's difficult to see clearly. But the first one is the cellular subscription. And Vietnam is now second only to Hong Kong for the number of subscriptions for mobile phone. And also the growth is very impressive. In 2000, it's almost nothing, but now we are second in the world. Internet users, again, we are at 11th place. It's very impressive. The growth also spectacular. Another issue of our concern is labor, productivity. That's something we need to work on very hard. And by the way, we are now we are almost second to the last one. Too bad. The same again. Now, let me talk about a more further down the road future. We're now in 2015 and beyond vision and implementation. Our goal is to be a prosperous people, a strong country, equitable, democratic, and civilized society. And the tool for that is a strategic socio-economic development strategy adopted about 2 years ago. And we have 2 5-year plans to carry out the plan. So for 2020, key development targets, you can see on the screen. We try to have the same average annual growth GDP, about 8% every year. And the real GDP per capita is $3,000. In terms of social development, HDI, that's one of the hardest target to achieve. We try to be in the upper average group of human development index. And for skilled labor, we try to have 70% of our labor be trained in habits to be skilled labor, which we are outsourced right now. In the first 5-year plan, also we have some concrete targets. Again, GDP growth is more modest, it's about 7%. And especially the public debt, we try to have no more than 65% of GDP, which is quite doable. And now I also try to give you a more visual understanding of the GDP growth in real terms in the next 5 years. You can see a very, very strong, steady increase from 12 to 15, and then quite stable at a high level, 7.5%. That's the focus by the Economist Intelligence Unit, by the economists. That's also a composite, put all indicators together, but the same idea here. It's very, very steady development in growth of Vietnam, both in terms of real GDP growth, consumer price inflation, so would be kept under control. It's 8.4 at the target year 2016. Growth in productivity. Again, here we can see some very good improvement down the road in the longer run. The indicator here shows we achieved 5.5% of growth for productivity. That's very important. Dr. Locke will talk more about demography and family immigration. I just try to give you some ideas using UN migration projections. And you can see that especially the young age, the old age, working age population is still very, very strong. We believe that we have enough workforce to carry. And now let me close my presentation by two statements. The first one by Mr. Tony Blair. He just visited Vietnam 2 days ago. And in his remarks to the students at the Institute for International Relations in Vietnam, he said, he believed in the future Vietnam shall become one of the important countries in the world. And all Vietnam needs to do now is to get onto a new level of development. And to do so, he said, Vietnam should invest heavily into education and restructure the national economy, which we share these views. I also have a very impressive piece of news to share with you. 2 minutes before I left my office, the office of Mr. Tony Blair sent me the copy of the letter sent to Prime Minister of Vietnam, in which he said that he believed that Vietnam has a great future, set for rapid economic development and to become a significant regional and global power. And the issues that we discussed with our Prime Minister, the priorities of Vietnam are, reforming the economy and the state-owned enterprises, private sector development, public-private partnership, attracting more direct investment, developing education training, and adapting to climate change and protecting the environment. The last one, that's the economic intelligence unit, Vietnam Focus. In this report, 3 weeks ago, they said Vietnam's economy will remain strong in the next 2 decades, supported by expanding private sector, the same idea as Mr. Tony Blair shared, Prime Minister, and which will contribute to greater competition and more efficient resource allocation. And eventually, a series of wide-ranging economic reforms will bolster foreign investors' confidence and pave the way for sustained increase in foreign direct investment, and also, more importantly, to contribute to the upgrading of technology and greater competitiveness. I'm ready for questions later.
Thank you for a very illuminating talk. So now, Dr. Patrick Locke will tell us about the demographic aspect.
Thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm very excited to be here, but I'm also feeling that I need to make a few apologies for myself. First and foremost, I need to apologise for not being an economist. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to be talking about those social development challenges that were mentioned and talking about internal migrants. The other thing I want to say before beginning is I want to acknowledge the collaboration of my partners, Ms. Thum and Ms. Hua, who are very central to the work that we've done, and also the funding from the ESRC and the Department for International Development. The crux of the argument that I want to make is that if we want to understand the challenges for development in Vietnam, that are posed by the rising rates of internal migration, we need to consider how migration affects gendered family lives. So although we tend to think about a renovation process, the Dormoy process, as being largely about economic restructuring, we're also talking about a process in which the relationship between state and citizens is being restructured in certain ways. And these are posing challenges for migrants in terms of managing their working and their family lives together. The family unit remains really central in development. It's, in Vietnam, it's very central to the social reproduction of the nation, but increasingly, poor and low-income men and women find that they have to go away from home in order to access new economic opportunities. So these people find themselves caught between the aspirations of playing a part in the change that is happening in Vietnam and improving their family lives, and the need to go away to access those new economic opportunities. And this leads to a set of very complicated family strategies, often carried out across different locations. And these have a bearing for how far these migrants are able to translate their opportunities to access those new chances for work, how far they can translate that into better lives for their families, both in the immediate future, but also over the longer term. And of course that has implications also for Vietnam over the longer term, because their children are these young children who are coming into your young workforce, servicing this growth. So against a long historical backdrop of traditional Confucian values and socialist efforts to reform the family and improve gender relations, we have the impact of renovation. And that's having ambiguous effects, some intentional, some unintentional. So the state is in some ways withdrawing from a very direct intervention within the family, but we're also seeing, as a result of the opening up of the economy, much more westernisation, and we're seeing new ideas, particularly about sexualised femininity, coming into Vietnam. At the same time as we're seeing the social sector being restructured and responsibility for social reproduction being pushed back into the family sphere, we're also seeing a resurgence of ideas about traditional values that people would like to preserve in the face of rapid change. And many of those ideas are very strongly gendered. And it's in this context that we have very rapid changes in migration, increasing volume of migration, increasing significance of migration, but also changes in the gendered composition of that migration. And two of the key dynamics, of course, are the household registration system, which is increasingly being relaxed, but is being superseded by an economic dualism that preserves many of the barriers that were previously bureaucratic. And also a very strong feminisation of migration flows. So whereas it was mostly young women migrating to work in special economic zones earlier on, we're now seeing women migrating around marriage, after marriage, between children, and throughout their marriages. So we're seeing an important change. The point is that the spatial organisation of new economic opportunities means that increasingly husbands and wives, or parents and children, have to spend considerable periods of time living apart from one another, rather than in a locally unified family setting. So the question that our research wanted to ask was how the family strategies of migrants are central to thinking about the impact that migration actually has on the well-being of migrants and migrants' family members. I'm not going to say very much about this, other than to, I want to talk too clear and it's not going to. No, it's not going to. Sorry. Our research was conducted in 2008. It's qualitative research. It was looking at migrants who had young children. So all the migrants we spoke to were low-income migrants doing informal sector work. So they were, in a sense, people who were being left out of the process that we've been talking about. There are all people who have a child who is under 8 years of age, so they're a very specific group, a group of people who are trying to establish new families and set up a secure basis for them for the future. These are the people who are wanting to invest in education so that their children can get into this new economy. The migrants we talked to were in Hanoi and in Ho Chi Minh, and we spoke to 77 migrants in total, men and women, very detailed life histories. We found that a commonality was that migration for all of these people was about trying to forge a better life for their families. So migration, even though it was for work, was very centrally about the family. But the strategies that people used were very varied, and they were changing and open to negotiation. They weren't fixed, they were dynamic, changing as circumstances changed. And they were all characterised by very complex trade-offs and tensions. We found 3 broad strategies. We found visiting marriages, some where wives were left in rural areas, some where husbands were left in rural areas. And we found remote parenting, where couples went together to the city, leaving children behind. We found families trying to make a life for themselves and their children together in the city. And we found families in which nobody lived together. One parent would migrate to one destination, another parent to a different destination, and the children would be at home. And we found plenty of evidence to support other researchers' findings that women as well as men are increasingly migrating before, between, and after the births of their children. So this raises some really central challenges for migration in managing that family life and ensuring the social reproduction of their family and family relationships. Crucially, migration is about family, but it's also in tension with family. So as Ling, who's a porter, told me, I can't provide for my children if I stay at home, and I can't care for them if I migrate for work. This is the dilemma that migrants at this level are facing. It creates huge parenting dilemmas. These people feel happy. I know my child will go to school, I know I can buy the medicine for them, I know they will have the uniform because I'm going away to work. But the things I'm worried about are their social and emotional development, their affective ties, the filial piety and important family relations that matter not just now, but they matter for resolving tensions as these children become adolescents, make work choices, grow up and enter the workforce. There are also marital tensions, but these are less important to the migrants than the parenting dilemmas. Those are where they place the emphasis. Underlying these and making migrants' attempts to try and manage these situations more difficult are a series of underlying insecurities, barriers and inequalities. And some of the core amongst those are differences across rural and urban areas. An absence of effective social protection for this group in the countryside, but difficulties claiming their entitlements in the city. There are problems created by legislation controlling informal sector activity within the city, which make many of their livelihoods semi-criminalised. And there are also problems of discriminatory attitudes and practices to rural people who are seen as being somehow backward or not belonging. And this creates, going forward, some very important challenges for social policy for Vietnam to try and tackle at the same time as assuring that growth stays on the road. Core to those is recognising and responding to the new mobility of workers and their families. This is what the future is going to look like. We're not going to, mobility is not going to be put off or die away. This is how people's lives are going to be. So we need to recognise and respond to that mobility. We need to acknowledge the value that even these low-income migrants are adding to the urban economy. And we need to ensure that social rights are portable. So the entitlements that people have need to reside in their person rather than in their place of origin. So they follow that person and that person's children wherever they might be. We need to recognise that there are important differences in family strategies. So it's no good, for instance, trying to work with migrants to improve their urban guest houses if they're entirely orientated to sending money back home. They're interested in rural investment through their work in the city. But there are other migrants who are trying to make a life in the city who would like to work on improving their housing in the city. but they only want to do so if that kind of investment is going to lead to them getting a house title that they can defend and use to claim urban residency. So we have to recognise that not everyone is pursuing the same kind of strategy, and we have to take on board what it is that people are actually trying to do and try and support them in that. As part of this, there needs to be an attempt to revalue social reproduction more broadly. So yes, growth now matters, but it also matters what people can do with that. And for these people, they're really trying to invest in their children. Investing in children's education is the #1 priority. But all of these parents are really worried about their children going off the rails because they're not there to supervise their homework. They're worried about not being there as their children become adolescents and need more guidance in social matters for girls as well as boys. And they're also concerned not just about the things that mothers provide for the children, but they're particularly concerned about the things that fathers provide for the children. And that's especially the case as children move towards adolescence. So the migrants I spoke to who had split families were concerned about the present and social relations at the present, but they were much, much more worried about what was going to happen when their children were adolescents if they couldn't afford at that stage to go back and set up a rural business. As part of keeping an eye on this, we need to ensure that the increasing attempts to bring migration into the official data sets engage not just with migrants as bodies that move around and do work and earn money. We need to think about these migrants as people who are nested within family units. So we need to think about the implications for migrants' families and to keep that joined up somehow, rather than seeing them as atomised economic actors. If you'd like to know more about this work, there are a couple of briefs. I've got some copies today, but you can go onto our website and find them. They're available in Vietnamese as well as in English, and the full data set is available for other researchers to use. And it'd be great for someone to do some other work with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Locke. And now turn to Mr. Paul Smith.
Someone going to put my presentation up for me, or shall I do it myself? Thank you very much for letting me come and talk about Vietnam. It's a little bit of a passion for me, and normally I speak to a British audience to encourage them to go and export to Vietnam. And therefore I always start with an apology that I'm biased, and actually I don't really apologise because I quite like being biased about Vietnam. And today what I want to do is to try and talk about my vision for the future and why I think Vietnam as a country is going to really thrive in the future. Because it's all about today. The future is about today and the way that the country is developing with some challenges on the way. But I like to think that the challenges are not challenges, they're actually opportunities. So first of all, my credentials. I've been operating in Vietnam for 13 years now, and the business of which I'm the chairman of, has 4,500 employees in Vietnam, software engineers, business process outsourcing engineers, call centre people and recruitment people operating in Vietnam. And you know, there's £180 million worth of revenue that is generated by Harvey Nash from this Vietnamese team. And not 1 penny of that revenue is spent in Vietnam because it's exports out of Vietnam into the rest of the world. So we are one of the biggest technology exporters on behalf of the Vietnamese government in the country, along with another company of which I'm a partner and board director, and that is FPT Corporation. So the two of us are the big players in technology. So that's what we do in Vietnam, that's where I come from. Our office is in Vietnam, and our team in Vietnam, as you can see. Why Vietnam? Why did we choose Vietnam originally? I think it's important to know that, and it's because of the people. Our business is a people business. It's about skills,